The last clip for the cell. When we talked earlier, we said that the center of our cell, the nucleus, has our DNA in it. And when the cell's not in a state of division, the DNA and protein are these loose kind of bumpy threads that are scattered throughout the nucleus. Just kind of looks like little squiggles when you look at the picture. And when the cell is about to divide, this chromatin collects and condenses into what we know as a chromosome, so into that structure. In that, we have the information for our protein synthesis, or that's why we call it blueprints. I like to think of it like our recipe book. Okay, so it's got all the recipes we need to build our proteins. So this directs the cell to keep producing the proteins that we need to carry on our processes in our life. So when you think of DNA collectively, sections of it are genes. I always think they're like a page in the recipe book. Okay, and in that gene, there's the recipe for one protein. So we know from previous learning that inherited traits are determined by the genes that we are passed to from our parents. Sometimes they're expressed and sometimes they're not expressed. Now in this picture, I want to stress that I don't want you to memorize the stages of cell division. You probably have spent some time in that before, but that's not what I want because we want to talk generally. I try to imagine that how, as a nurse, and I know some of you are not going to be nurses when you take this, but how, when you're, why you're taking this course, but as a nurse generally, which is the focus of this, you're probably not going to stand at the bedside and say to somebody, oh, by the way, in your prophase stage of your cell division, unless you're working in chemotherapy or unless, you're working in a genetics clinic or something like that. So my little rant here, just I don't want you to spend time memorizing it. And you'll notice that there's not an outcome devoted to that. But why I wanted this picture here is where I was going with this, is looking at our little chromatin, right? See all these little bits here and here and here and here, and then they condense and they form into those chromosomes that I was talking about earlier. And then we have cell division. So one of the things that's important to remember about chromosomes is that when we're producing a new individual, we need to get a sperm and an egg cell. And those each have 23 chromosomes in them, so that when you come together to the 46 chromosomes that you would have for a new individual, you have 23 pair, one of each coming from the mom and the dad. Okay, so this is our hereditary information, and chromosomes have, and inside them are genes. Okay, so mom comes along, okay, and she's going to bring 23 eggs, 23 chromosomes to the egg, and dad's going to come along, and he's going to bring 23 in his sperm, and collectively then that new cell is going to have 46, which is the amount of all regular cells. So the gamete or the sex cells, that's what we call them, have 23 chromosomes. So it's important to say, well, how does that happen when all cells usually have 46? So let's look at this picture because that's talking about spermatogenesis. So in spermatogenesis, we're coming along with a primary spermatocyte. Site refers to cell. It divides and takes those chromosomes and divides them into 23, and eventually we end up with 4 sperm cells. However, I'm just going to go back to the previous one. In the egg cell, okay, the chromosomes condense, and what they do is they split into 23, and then we discard this part. And that's pretty briefly put there, so that we have an egg with 23, and here comes Mr. Sperm here, okay, bringing his 23, so that what we'll end up with is 46. Something to remember is that we have these 23 pairs, okay, 22 are autosomes, and we'll talk about those in patho, but the 23rd pair is the sex cells. And how they're differentiated is if we look at them, the female always has two X's and the man has XY. And so when they come together, so let's say mom brings one X, okay, and dad brings an X. So that's going to be a female, right? However, what if mom brings an X and dad brings a Y? That's going to be the male. Okay, so father determines the sex of the child. So there are two types of cell divisions when we look at that, because we said that healthy cells can divide to continue to form new cells. So if it's regular cells, it's going to be mitosis, and that's to get two identical daughter cells, except in the process of cell division by which the egg and sperm are formed, that's meiosis. So this is division of the sex cells, this is division of regular cells. And what you'll notice when we go back, sorry to take you back here, what we notice is you call it the first mitotic cell division, okay? And there's another mitotic cell division. And our last point then is to look at the concept of differentiation. And again, I'm going to go to the picture. So we talked about it earlier that fertilization involves the egg and the sperm. And now we have 46 chromosomes. So they start dividing and dividing and dividing, mitosis, because it's a regular cell now. Eventually, what happens is we need to start specializing these cells. So the DNA will either turn itself on or turn itself off. Like it'll turn on what it wants to be and turn the rest of the types of cells off. So some will turn into white blood cells like you see here, and some will turn into red blood cells and gland cells, etc. Okay, and what happens is when we want to differentiate or make them different, because until this point they're all looking the same, when we want to differentiate them, then we're going to end up with specific cells or different cells, differentiation. And that's the lectures for the cell.